Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar with the Stanley brothers. My name's Emily McFarlane. I'm the Senior Campaign Lead here at Birchal. And just before I introduce the team, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which we are beaming to you from today. Birchal is based on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm sure you're very familiar with these two faces. I'm joined by Oliver Zugel and Jesse Stanley from Stanley Brothers Australia. Jesse, in case you don't know, is one of the 7 Stanley brothers and has played an integral role in the development and popularization of medicinal cannabis, particularly in the US. And Oliver Zugel is the founder of Volumed and has played a large role in helping to bring the Stanley brothers to Australia. So a little bit of a brief introduction on Birchal. We're working with the Stanley brothers on their crowdsourced funding offer. Just in case any of you aren't familiar with crowdsourced funding or CSF, it's a relatively new form of fundraising in Australia, and it allows startups and small businesses to raise capital from a large number of smaller investors, also known as retail investors, also a large number of sophisticated or wholesale investors through an online platform such as Birchal. This is a little bit of a different form of fundraising compared to traditional fundraising, which might be bank loans or venture capitalists. So in this case, companies can turn to the general public, and often this can be their communities to raise money in exchange for equity in their business. So Birchal Financial Services is the licensed intermediary for the offer. I would like to remind everybody in attendance today that the information and discussion on this webinar is for informational purposes only and should not be used as a recommendation to invest. So please do your own research and always consider the general CSF risk warning and offer document before investing. If you do require any more information, please head to birchal.com or reach out to us on the support line at Birchal. We'd be happy to help. So we've had a lot of amazing questions come through the platform from potential investors, which we'll set out to answer in today's session. And I'm sure a lot of you have come with questions today. So please feel free to pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're also recording today's session, so if you do have to jump off early, or if you'd like to rewatch anything that we go through today, a recording will be sent around. So let's get things started. Oliver, would you mind giving us a little bit of an overview of the campaign so far?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Emily, for having us here, and hello to the audience. So we're happy with what we're seeing today. We have over 3,000 prospective investors signed up and reached our minimum threshold in a day. We are now, I think, over 500K from about 270 investors, mostly at this point in time still retail. A lot of the wholesale investors are in touch with the company with regards to our warrants program, which I will be walking the audience through a little later on. But with 8 days to go, I think we're happy with what we're seeing. And again, from our perspective, given we're a profitable company already, this is for us, whatever target we're going to reach isn't a needed necessity for the survival of the business. It's rather the more money we raise, the faster we'll be able to grow. So I think we're looking at this with confidence, and we're happy with what we're seeing.
Great, thank you so much. There's been a few questions surrounding the corporate structure of Volumed Holdings and how Stanley Brothers Australia fits in. Could you give us a little more clarity on that, Oliver?
Yeah, well, first of all, important to understand the nature of the partnership we have with the Stanley Brothers. The Stanley Brothers are our largest outside shareholder at Volumed Holdings. Volumed Holdings is the global operating holding company located here in Spain, here in Europe. And this has resulted from, I think, knowing each other for over 3 years. And as a result of this, Stanley Brothers Australia is a 100% subsidiary of Volumed Holdings. Stanley Brothers Australia, which is the vehicle in which the crowdfund is investing in, is fundamentally a sales and marketing company. It's focused on the most profitable part of the business, which are the relationships with doctors and patients. And it has the perpetual right to use the Stanley Brothers brand, its IP and know-how at no cost to the Australian shareholders. So Stanley Brothers, by the way, buys its product from Volumed in Colombia, but is not obliged to do so. So Stanley Brothers Australia can buy the products from any third party if it gets at a better price from them.
Jesse, did you have anything to add to that in terms of the brand licensing deal?
No, I think Oliver hit it pretty well. I feel confident in Fully Med's operational skills in Australia, having been there for the years that they've been there, and we've licensed our brand in perpetuity to Oliver and Fully Med, and now considered us. But again, I think it's an important thing that there's no additional cost to it. So we're excited about the strategy that we have in Australia moving forward.
Thank you so much. Oliver, this might be one for you to answer. How did you arrive at your valuation?
Yeah, look, the traditional method of valuation, I think, is fundamentally looking at comparable companies. Is what we did. We looked at pretty much every single medicinal cannabis company in Australia, which is listed on crowdfund, created a comparable universe of companies who had similar levels of revenues than what we are currently achieving. And the number which popped out of that research of ours was 55 million. That was 55 million Australian dollars was the average valuation for the medicinal cannabis companies here in Australia. To our knowledge, most of them, when they did their crowdfund raise, they were not profitable yet at the time, which compares to ours, where we have made $300,000 worth of profit in the first quarter of operations, sold 1.4 million just from our initial flower products, with other products to come soon. And we have decided, after discussing also with a number of investors, that our valuation should be 35 million as compared to the 55 million average, which has been the benchmark for the last couple of years. That's a 30% discount on what's out there in the market. And on top of it, we offer warrants. That's the right for larger investors, wholesale investors, to get the right to buy. For every share they buy today, they have the right to buy another one over the next 2 years at the same price. I'll explain this a little further on. But we think it's economically a very compelling package for a company which isn't a startup. That's really manifested by the fact that we're already profitable. The reason it can be profitable in such a short period of time is that all the operating system, structure, supply chain is already in place. And I think that is, for us, the basis for how we got to our 35 million valuation.
Thank you. I know you touched on the warrants. Are you able to give a little bit more color to the warrant structure and investor rewards at the same time?
Yeah, so good point of reference here always is the offer document, as well as, I think, going into the Birchal data room, where the actual terms and conditions of the warrants are clearly explained. But in short, if you are an eligible wholesale investor, you will get, for every share you buy today, you get the right to buy another one during 2 years at the same price of what you're paying for it today. That warrant comes at no extra cost to you. So fundamentally get stapled, you get a share and the warrant at the same time. There's no extra price for it. And I think that's a great way of fundamentally increasing your returns at no risk if our valuation is going up. And the details on the warrants and whether you are eligible or not are in the virtual data room. And what we would suggest for wholesale investors who are interested, that they contact you or us directly in terms of their eligibility. It's not entirely straightforward. There are a number of conditions which are linked to the eligibility process, and we would very much encourage people to reach out to us. This is often a quite one-to-one process. Our legal advisors are involved in this, but I think it's a very attractive package, which I think hasn't been done before, and I think it's worth for people taking a good look at.
Thank you so much, Oliver. You're right. This hasn't been done on the virtual platform before, so it's a very exciting opportunity for investors for sure. I'm just going to circle back. We just had a question, and I know that you just quickly spoke about the valuation. Was it an agency externally that came to help you with the valuation, or was this an internal decision?
Internal decision. So we did do the research on comparable valuations ourselves.
Great. Thank you so much. So I know that you guys have an exclusive deal with Vitura. Why did you choose to actually team up with them in the first place?
Yeah, having been in the industry as long as I have, over 16 years, I find one of the most valuable things is longevity. With longevity, you're able to navigate the hurdles and the minds that come with any business, but the cannabis business specifically has its own set of challenges. I think that Viterra has been around for a long time. They've established a very good business. They've had struggles like anybody else has, but I think they've come out on top. For us, I think that made the most sense. We absolutely had options. But I think that the deal structure that we put together with them for our distribution with Stanley Brothers Australia was very attractive for us. And frankly, to be honest with you, I think that we will achieve great things. And I appreciate their help in moving it forward, and also Oliver and his work getting that deal done. It just made sense for us. So we feel very confident in their history as a company and their future.
Oliver, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it well. They're number one player, and I think we have a good fit established with them, and we're very happy with where we came out.
Great. Thank you. So obviously you've had a really strong start with your launch in Australia, achieving $1.4 million in revenue since the January launch. What will growth look like for the rest of 2024 and beyond?
So, but fundamentally, I think three sources. First of all, as in any business, growing with your existing accounts is the most profitable way of establishing traction. And therefore, what we are doing first is go back to the people we have now established commercial relationships with, and see from the initial traction we're getting for the flower product, how we can grow beyond this. This will include also the launch of new products, which we have earmarked for July for the vape cartridges, for October for a specific oil formulation, which I think is fundamentally what we call the original formula. So the same formula which we used and the Stanley brothers used with Charlotte Figge over 15 years ago. And the edibles, I think, are scheduled for the first quarter of 2015, so 2025, of course. And so we're going back to our existing customers. We will widen the customer network. We have, of course, not touched every single customer account which is in the market over the very short period of time we're here until now. But I think between growing with existing accounts, adding new accounts, and adding new products, we're very confident that we have a good growth potential kind of ahead of us here in the remainder of the year.
Thank you so much, Oliver. So this one's probably going to lean a bit more into Jesse's expertise. I know that historically the Stanley Brothers brand has been really intent on making sure that the science is backing all of the decision making in new products and formulas. Could you elaborate a little bit on what this entails?
Yeah, I think, again, from the history of how we've operated and the products that have come out, in the US, when we come out with a product, it's always best backed off of science, whether that be observational, anecdotal evidence that leads us to that, allows us to better make products for the efficacy of whatever the consumer might be, whatever they're dealing with. I think leading into that in Australia, where it's a very beginning market, where people are generally using just flower and talking about, high THC, CBD, and terpenes. I think Oliver alluded to it earlier. I think it's a growth strategy for us is to bring the science and the know-how of what we've seen in the research, whether that be minor cannabinoids that, trigger on need states, or a relationship with CBD, THC, and different terpenes to create better, more functional products, whether that be, vapes in the future, gummies, or edibles. And I think that comes from just a history of what we have, similarly to sleep studies that we've done, and the knowledge that we have on that. Now, obviously, this is available as white papers about everybody, but it's the know-how and the knowledge of how many milligrams, because sometimes in these formulations, a difference of call it CBN at 30 milligrams per serving versus 100 milligrams per serving can have two entirely different outcomes. So from our perspective, looking at that data so that we can come out with the best product so that people have a standardized delivered effect, and every time they buy our product it would be the same. So again, I think it's the most important aspect of who we are, and again, I think it leads to the growth of the company year over year.
Thank you. Actually, this probably leads into one of the questions that's come through. The studies that you're currently working on, are they strictly around cannabinoids or psilocybin as well?
Yeah, so my brother, our other company that my brothers and I founded, Ajna Biosciences, the first three drugs that we have will be cannabinoid for autism. That's currently going into phase 2 here in Australia, or there in Australia. I'm in New York. And then the other one is a psilocybin drug for that is about to be launched as well. So we look at botanicals as a whole. We will mine deep in cannabis because there's over 100 different compounds, and each one of these cannabinoids has a different reason for being in the plant and a relationship with our body. So we expect to get into, hopefully, in botanical drug development and THC, CBN, other things that could be available, and then we'll figure out the indication as we study more on what the best outcome can be. But my brothers and I are committed to botanical drug development, botanical science. And I think that only steers and uplifts our Stanley Brothers Australia as we come out with new products, and that evidence and that science is only going to steer us as we expand our product portfolio.
Right. This might be a good segue just to go back to the very beginning in the background of the Stanley Brothers in growing cannabis. How did you start doing that?
Growing cannabis?
Yeah, I think that was the question. I know you have probably answered that a few times in your life, but if you could give us a little bit of a background, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, basically out of need, both economically and opportunity. In 2008, obviously, we had a crash in the United States, really worldwide, as it pertained to real estate. And a lot of people had to figure out another way to make money. My brother talked us into medical cannabis, being one of the first groups that did it. Colorado had legalized, quasi-legalized cannabis. And so for us, the only way we could really source cannabis at the time was cultivation. So we started collecting seeds and different strains, cultivating under the Colorado laws at the time. That only expanded from, I could tell the stories, it's probably a good movie, basement grows to warehouses to eventually greenhouse, which is what we've always done and done best. We could control the greenhouse, use the natural sunlight as opposed to the energy in warehouses. And honestly, plants don't belong in warehouses anyway. But that sort of led us to, for the most part, treating people that had cancer and adverse effects of chemotherapy that were dealing with sleep and weight loss. And upon that, we really got into CBD because we had seen studies that shown that CBD helped stop the metastasis of cancer. Well, most of our patients at the time had cancer. So we figured if we could give high CBD products to some of these elderly people, they wouldn't get the psychotropic effect. They could take high CBD during the day and high THC at night. So we started Mendelian breeding with different species, came up with what is now known as the final product of Charlotte's Web, named after Charlotte Figi. In that, at the same time, we're also the first group to cultivate cannabis or hemp under modern irrigation. So there's a lot of firsts for us in cultivation, which is why I believe in the Colombian cultivation opportunity, having cultivated cannabis all over the world, in the US, Uruguay, also Colombia. We find it very strategic to cultivate where the natural light is in abundance, but also the cost of good low and the elevation high. So all these things work together for us. It checked our boxes when it comes to cultivation, and our hope is to supply Australia with a good product as well, but to expand on cultivation as well. I'm not sure it all comes from Colombia, but I think the majority will, just from a supply chain standpoint. But Oliver and I talked about this earlier. Our hope is to potentially cultivate in Australia someday, as the laws make it easier to do so. But from a cultivation standpoint, we still our hands very much involved, whether it be hemp or cannabis.
And bringing this to Australia, and obviously it's cultivated in Colombia, how does investment from Australians, particularly in this crowdfunding campaign, create wealth and well-being for people in Australia?
I'll take this. I think we've been asked this many times that at the end we're foreigners in Australian land somehow, despite the fact that we as Fulimed have been operating in the country for many years by now. And a couple of things to say. First of all, we are, I think, very mindful about the fact that when you're operating in a new geography, and as Fulimed, we're operating in 8 different countries around the world at this point in time, that when you operate in a new geography, you need to be very cautious of not just simply transferring prior expertise to where you're landing. I mean, this is a highly regulated industry. Every single country has a different regulatory context. And I think the biggest mistake one can make is going into a new country with a cookie cutter approach and think this is like McDonald's and do the same burger there everywhere around the world. That is actually not how this works. We have acted upon this in the following way. First of all, we have an Australian team. They were recruited from some of the leading operators here and who have experience for many years in this country. So our local team, I think, is deeply entrenched in what the medicinal cannabis framework in Australia looks like, which is, I think, important to what we're doing. Secondly, and very often misunderstood actually, is that the part of the growing, if you look at the total value of the product, is actually very small. So what you're really bringing in is less than 20% of the value add of the total product chain comes from the outside, and everything else from there on, which starts with the actual importation, the warehousing, the sterilization, the packaging, the distribution, ultimately the prescribing, all over 80% of the total value in the system is actually generated within Australia. And technically speaking, we are a made in Australia product under that regulation, right? I think you need to have more than 50 or 60% of value added being produced locally, which we absolutely do. So I think it's a twofold answer. I think I think we're mindful about the need to have local infrastructure and local experienced people. Secondly, I think the majority of the value is being generated here. And thirdly, importantly, and perhaps Jesse, you want to talk to this is a medicine which going to Australian patients and therefore improves the lives of Australians, which I think is the whole purpose of why we're here.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. I think, obviously our goal is to make people healthier and give people healthier options. Obviously, that's one of the highest forms of success that I think that we can really get. At the same time, increasing the market size in Australia. I look at Australia, I see, much larger than that of Colorado. Colorado is about 5 million people, and yes, they're recreational, but they do around 1.8 to 2.2 billion a year in revenue. That's a massive economic driver for just the state of Colorado, and I think about each state from that aspect. So I think the more science and the more credible nature we bring to an industry, potentially we can develop a better, larger, robust industry for Australia that creates jobs, massive economic impact there, but also, again, going back to it, healthier people and healthier options, maybe people getting off of opiates and people drinking less and so on and so forth. So these are the ancillary types of things we hope to bring to Australia as well, beyond that of what Oliver did actually say very, very, correctly, is the growing of the cannabis is a very small portion of it. If you were to set up cultivation all over the world, you'd lose a lot of money. You just can't do that. So I think we're very strategic in how we're creating the opportunity in Australia. And, as we build out a successful business, we'll be putting it back into Australia to build an even bigger and better business.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Do you see any hurdles in bringing the product into Australia?
No, not for the time being. So I think we have seen the importation framework into Australia to be very open and sensibly regulated again in terms of what the GMP rules are. They have been tightened, they've been strict, they have been made more strict and more comparable and equal playing fields, I think, between the local industry and the international industry. So it would strike me that as deregulation sets in, and you just saw it recently, the deregulation moves in the US with another descheduling, which Jesse can talk about if people are interested. I think the more deregulation you will see, I think the more product flow of products, so the more product flow you will see internationally. And I think that's in line with the history we've seen in Australia. It's the same what's happening in Germany. In Germany, importations are getting a larger share over time. There's going to be a balance always. There will always be local production there. And I think particularly if there's a recreational market going to open, there will be local cultivation. That's what Jesse alluded to in the prior comment he made. So at a point in time, it's not that we're categorically opposed to do a cultivation in Australia at all, but it's just not the time at this stage. So I think we're looking at a good framework, which has, I think, now been pressure tested with the TGA and the different operators for the last 6 to 7 years, and we're very comfortable about seeing that carrying forward for the next future.
Awesome, thank you. In terms of the costing from the farm to essentially the patient, how have you been able to get that down over the years? If you're particularly, shipping it overseas, going to other countries and other jurisdictions, does that become a problem?
No, so often we're being asked and said, where are actually the cost differences coming from, and how can it be that when you're cultivating a product in South America or South Africa for the matter, I think, how could it be that the cost difference is so massive? So why does it cost me 20 times more, 10 times more to do it in Australia or in North America than it would be in South America? And climate is precisely, I think, one of the key reasons here, which is again what Jesse alluded to before. Fundamentally, we have permanent sunlight, 12-hour sunlight cycles around the equator, which means, and a constant temperature. People very often think Colombia, when they think about Colombia, they think about 40 degrees in jungle and a lot of humidity. That's not the case. We're actually growing our products at 2,500 meter elevation. There's an average temperature of 15 degrees Celsius. There's not much variation there. There's no heating needed, no cooling needed, and we have a constant life cycle, which means that naturally you can run 4 to 5 crops per year, which of course in the Northern Hemisphere you wouldn't be able to do. So there if you grow outdoors, you do 1 crop as opposed to 4 to 5. That's the real major explanation on where this comes from. I think the cost difference, labor costs are of course lower compared to Australia at the same time. So that plays an important factor. But the most important factor indeed is actually the fact that the cost of water, the cost of electricity is very low compared to what we're seeing in other places. So that's just the structural economics of the business of growing in a equatorial region with moderate climate, and that's just hard to beat. Then I would say a second piece, which we have done differently from many others, which is that we grow at relatively small scale. So we have a 16-hectare farm, which is the size of 4 times the Melbourne cricket ground. So, which for an agriculture facility is not that large, frankly speaking. I mean, it's 16 hectares. So that, I think, of that facility, we only built out 2 hectares. So, and we really did not do what many other often publicly listed company who got funds in a large amount early on did, which is building a large cultivation upfront. We did do a relatively small footprint, which we are currently expanding. We're expanding it pretty much every year right now. We're accelerating the expansion quite heavily. But that's, we fundamentally follow the demand as opposed to put in a big supply chunk, which then imposes on you a lot of operating costs and drives you to needing to push a lot of volume, which is not our case. So we're, I think, quite happy of having started small and growing with the demand.
Thank you. And currently, how many strains do you have registered with the ICA in Colombia?
I think in total number 70. And so that's a pretty important genetic base. About half of it is CBD dominant. The other one is THC dominant. There is, for those of you who are agriculturally inclined, there's a very, very strict process of how you get these plants registered. So you need to run agricultural studies on each strain. They need to be stable over time. They're being tested so that there's no migration in your THC and potency level over time. The genetics need to be cultivated under the same condition. So getting actually your strains registered there has been, we did this 2018, I believe. it has been a pretty major accomplishment for us, and it's a significant library we can tap into from what we have.
In terms of the regulatory restrictions in Colombia, how do you plan to address any of these challenges in the future?
I think you would need to enlighten me when they are asking about these challenges. What would you know what they are referring to? The importation, exportation. I'm not clear what they are relating to.
That's okay. Whoever asked that question, I'm not sure who it is. It's anonymous. If you could give a little bit more color to the question, that would be perfect. Oh, exporting flowers from Colombia.
Export. So, good question. So, a little bit of history. When the Colombian government introduced medical cannabis, the medical cannabis industry in, I think, 2017. So it kind of all happened everywhere at the same time. Australia 2016, Colombia was 2017. Originally, the exportation of flower was excluded because the Colombian government was concerned to not somehow get medical cannabis associated with the cocaine drug history which the country has been exposed to, I think very regretfully, for such a long period of time. And so they excluded flower initially. They changed really the rules about 2 years ago, which I think has opened up a tremendous opportunity for the people who are cultivating in Colombia, which before they didn't have. They only could export liquids, so extracts and oils. At this point in time, they can extract flowers and all other product types. The Colombian government, which we're in very close relationship with, my business partner in Colombia is the vice president of the local association there. I think has been very supportive to the industry overall, has been very sensibly acting, I think, with regards to how the exportation schemes are working. So we are very comfortable that over a course of, by now, I think 2 or 3 governments, 3 presidents, I think there has been a very consistent policy with regards to promoting, I think, a responsible and sensible way of dealing with exportation from that country to other geographies.
And not only that, I think, having traveled quite a bit, because, Australia is one country that is expanding its medical cannabis and no pun intended, growing. Germany, the UK, other markets as well, but they're all going after Colombian, product as well. So it's being exported everywhere. This is a business that I think, from my perspective, actually, from the history of Colombia and maybe the black eye that it has on it from the cocaine years of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, I think this is a really good thing they can be proud of, because they can produce at high quality, very similar to their roses and other things. So I think Oliver's spot on there. I think it's something to be proud of. I think that it's something they're going to establish more, make easier, because many businesses are currently exporting. It's not just us in Australia, it's going into other countries, and I expect that footprint to only grow.
So thank you. So currently I know that you guys are distributing through Vitura. Do you have aspirations in getting involved in rehabilitation facilities? Is that something that you'd be looking into, or just in pharmacies?
Rehabilitation community, can you maybe?
So the question here is to combat potentially addictive personality traits or mental health disorders using alternative medicine.
No, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, on our side, Foliumed is a little different. Stanley Brothers Australia is a medical cannabis company. We have to be very careful about what we make claims on and other aspects like that. But I can tell you that my brothers and I are committed through our other companies to really go after mental illness. Our second drug will be specifically going after generalized anxiety. We plan to use plants and investigate plants moving forward to solve that very issue, including PTSD and some other stuff. Some of the stuff I can't really make, it's not the platform because it's not the same company. But, from our perspective, I think we're always looking to give back and to expand the research. But also, I've seen it firsthand. THC has helped in get people off of opiates and many other antidepressant medicines. So this is not something that, from my eyes, it's, this is in research across the world. So just as an ancillary byproduct of what we do, that will happen. But, you know, from a Stanley Brothers perspective, we're committed to that through our drug development company for sure.
Thank you so much. So with investment through this round, will it be just in Stanley Brothers Australia, or is it linked to the American company? Can you clarify?
This is just, go ahead. I mean, this is, the
Oh.
American company operates domestically. It is not associated with Stanley Brothers Australia other than the brand, common brand that they share in the spokespeople.
And probably going back to the structural discussion at the beginning of where we opened, Stanley Brothers Australia, sales and marketing company, doesn't own the cultivation, doesn't own the manufacturing. I think that's a big benefit for investors because where you do not make money in cannabis is typically when you're in cultivation, when you're in manufacturing. These are very, very asset-intensive businesses with low margins and which require significant volumes to run through to get you to profitability. We very deliberately kept this one outside on an arm's length supply contract basis, still leaving the Australian business in which people are investing the option to buy from other people at the same time if they can get a better price. But you actually, as an investor, benefit from the fact that you can buy in products at a very good price from us. If that's not the best price in the market, the Australian company can source from anyone else. There's no restriction on this whatsoever. And as an investor, you're not needing to fund the real hard assets, which are really not generating a lot of value at the industry at this point in time, which is cultivation and manufacturing. So and that actually explains why I think a company, very shortly after arriving can be profitable. It's only possible because of this. If you would have had associated with Stanley Brothers Australia and the investment by the investors, associated cultivation and manufacturing, there is no way that you would have been able to get to profitability in such a short period of time. And there would be significant operating losses associated with the business, which is not the case. So the frame really, and it's important, and it has been raised many times. You're looking at an Australian company, it's fundamentally sales and marketing operation, which is sourcing in products on an arm's length basis at best prices, not obliged to do so. That's what you have, which makes it fundamentally a very asset-light, easily scalable operation, which is focused on where the real value currently sits in the chain, which is the relationship with the doctors and with the patients. That is where the value sits, where it's going to be sustainable. That's where most of the profit is. And that's, I think, why we carved out the structure for Stanley Brothers Australia precisely in that way.
Thank you so much. So I think that was really, really clear. So obviously there's a lot of medicinal cannabis companies in Australia that are up and coming. How would you differentiate yourselves?
So I think fundamentally would look at 4 factors here. I mean, first and foremost, I think the recognition, and Jesse will jump into this, the recognition of the brand to us has been surprisingly positive and larger than I personally would have originally anticipated. So and when we say brand, it's more than the name on a product package. It's the entire values which are associated with the brand, the connection it manages to establish with the patients and with the doctors. And I think that is something you cannot replicate easily. You cannot just slap a product name on it and try to do marketing, which is very restricted anyhow in the industry today. And so brand, I think, is the first and foremost differentiator. So that's one. I think the second one is that you absolutely and critically need in this industry to make a profit and survive, you need to have very lowest cost operating position. This is an industry where a lot of people got in very early, where there's excess capacity and where there's pressure on prices, which has been going for a long period of time. I think you need to be in a position to be the last man standing if the prices go down further, which they will for a while. So lowest operating cost, I think, in our from our perspective, is absolutely fundamental. The third one of the 4 is what Jesse explained before, which is the science backing. I think, again, there's nearly 15 years of history in the US with the foundation program, 75,000 patients enrolled on one-to-one consultation. That's the practical experience, not just writing white papers, which is very important, which I think some of the researchers of Stanley Brothers over there have done. But on top of it, the actual practical experience about the product, what works in which circumstance for which patient, because this is a very personalized medicine. This isn't highly standardizable. And therefore, this experience, I think, is very valuable. It's the third factor. And I think, fourth, we believe that, yeah, our products are different at the same time. So the landrace flowers, which we have introduced, I think is the only or one of very few landrace flowers on the Australian market at this point in time. It's a specific genetic which hasn't been engineered to just get maximum THC potency, and it comes, from the Colombian highlands. I think that's appealing to some users, and we are striving for the other products, whether it's a vape cartridge, whether it's an edible, whether it's the oil, to also have unique distinguishing features to it. The vape cartridges are done solventless, so that's like a connoisseur product. It's called a live rosin product. The edibles, I think we'll talk about later. This is for 2025. But it's fundamentally the four things, what we said. So it's the product is differentiated, there's a brand there, there's a big science backing, and our operating costs are very low. And I think that all these four factors together makes it, I think, a compelling proposition.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Just to circle back to your discussion around the supply chain, if it's currently not owned by you and is at arm's length, while it's asset light, it can also create potentially vulnerabilities in the geopolitical environment. Can you give us a little bit more clarity on how you keep that secure and also how you keep consistency over quality?
Well, I think I can't opine on geopolitical environment, because I wouldn't know where the question probably is leading to. What I said is we're very stable, proven import-export regimes and regulatory regimes. And it's not just going out from Colombia to Australia, but it goes out from Colombia to a whole number of other locations around the world. So I think we have no particular concern, I think, around this. It would strike me that, apart from the fact that Stanley Brothers Australia has the right to source from any other people, that's what we will do if there is, and we have looked at sourcing products from Canada before. We decided against it. We felt that was not in line with what our policies, how we think about costs. So we have these options available, which are available to anyone right now in Australia, and the majority of people bringing in the product from other geographies, whether South Africa or Canada. We have these at the same time, so we're not disadvantaged if that was going to be a problem. And I think with that, I think we have no particular concerns, I think, around, call it, the political stabilities or import or export regimes. I think we're well set up to handle these as if they and when they should emerge.
Thank you. So in terms of reporting that's been released from Germany from Q1 2024, in terms of importation from Colombia, it's not listed. Can you speak to this at all?
Primarily. So I don't know the precise percentages, and I think that the Germans are still importing the very vast majority of their product from Canada, from all I know. The Netherlands. Well, Jesse,
shed light on this. I think the numbers are skewed in some ways because products come in through Portugal, they come in through other places, and they go through a GMP sort of process. I know for a fact that products, come from certain providers, because I know the providers that are putting them into the industry, as well as products from Lesotho, Montenegro, Macedonia. There are plenty of providers that people are looking to get from. Jamaica is another one, but a lot of them won't show on those numbers because they come into Portugal, they go through a GMP sort of washing protocol that gets them into the pharmacies and to the clinic's hands. It's important to know that, while Canada probably brings in the most because they have Aurora, they have some of the larger Canadian LPs, similarly, it will expand because of April 1st is the first day of recreational for Germany. That expansion, and if you look at the sales, I think the second quarter, third quarter is going to be very different of what you're seeing people go after and what people are bringing in. A lot of that is to keep up demand. It's important to know that the cultivation in Germany just recently was allowed, and I believe there's only 3 companies doing it. One of them is doing it specifically solely for the government, and I believe the other 2 have actually dropped their cultivation because it's so much easier to bring it in from other countries. So I think those numbers are skewed, but again, I think that upticks as recreational just happened. I think that you'll start to see that moving a lot more.
I think without going into the statistical details here, what is very clear is that the importation numbers have been going up and are now going up even further because of the legalization of adult use in the social clubs. So we see this firsthand. So we have a lot of Germans now reaching out, which they didn't do really all that much before, because the demand is going up so much because of the recreational. And I think the importation circumstances in most of the markets are similar. So where you're just seeing a gradual increase.
So I know you've mentioned Canada and it not being part of the strategy at the moment. Is there a particular reason why?
Canada as a market or as a importation or
As an exporter to Australia and Germany?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily something we've said no to. I think at the end of the day, well, one, Germany is not, I mean, Stanley Brothers Australia, we're concentrated on Australia, specifically Australia. Germany is just another market that we can, they're very different markets, very, very different markets. I think Australia is a third of the people in Germany for one, but for us, our sourcing, as Oliver said, we will source specifically when we get into more standardized products where we feel like, whether that be edibles, live rosin vapes, or anything like that, we want to ensure that those products are the same every time. So that if you get it, they're very similar. It's really, you can get very close with flower. You can't get it all the same because you're cultivating at different times. I think that our differentiator in Colombia is that we can get very close to standardizing that flower product, but we're not opposed to bringing a product from Canada. I think that's the differentiator though from us that I actually appreciate, is that almost everybody else, that's where their product comes from. So the unique opportunity for us is to be different. We cultivate our own. I think that one thing that Oliver missed is a vertical integration aspect. While we can source from other places, there is an importance to that as well, as opposed to me buying from the same person, putting my brand on it. Well, why is it different than the guy next to me who has the same source from the same people? So to me, we've never done that as a brand. Charlotte's Web never did that. Stanley Brothers hasn't done that in the US. And so I think that's probably why we haven't looked at it deeply, but sourcing from them on finished products, oils, edibles is certainly a possibility depending on the cost of good and how good the product is.
Thank you. In terms of the cannabis products in Australia, would you say the supply and demand of these products is driven by medical and patient needs, or the cannabis industry as a whole and keeping up with what is going on in other parts of the world?
I think that's both. I'll let Oliver touch on it. I do think it's both. I think obviously the other parts of the world are moving maybe a little faster because they've had regulations longer. So you'll see different products maybe in California than you're going to see in Australia. But at the most, I think the patient needs to ask for the product specifically, but that also needs to be geared towards science. At the end of the day, it's a medical marijuana regulatory body that we're talking about here. It's not recreational. So they're 2 very different things. Like, I don't think you're going to see a lot of the recreational products make it into Australia as fast as they do in currently what's going on in Germany. So I think that's because of it's a good regulated market. I think the TGA does it well. I applaud them for that, and I think they're seeing how it goes. But I don't expect it to move quickly. I think it will stick to the more medical type of products that are going to be innovated on. But we'll see. It all depends on what the patients are asking for and what the doctors are asking for as well. And then it's our job as suppliers to do that under the law and under the regulations of the TGA.
Thank you. So I know you've spoken a lot as to where your product in terms of the flower comes from. Where are your other products manufactured, such as your vapes or oils?
So the supply chain looks slightly different for each of the product. Flower, as you said, is clear, so that we're doing in Colombia. Vapes, the actual liquid is, so the extract which goes into a vape cartridge is also being manufactured in Colombia and then gets filled, packaged in Australia. So that's, the edibles, the way we are setting up the supply chain is that the ingredients again will come from Colombia. They may come from another source, because on a very standardized basis, this could be different. But I think let's assume the ingredient for the edibles will come from Colombia. But then the actual entire manufacturing of edibles, which is a more complex undertaking, will be taking place in Australia. We are in pretty advanced conversation with one of our partners, manufacturing partners over there, what that will be looking like. But that's what the supply chain really for the product range looks like. I forgot to talk about oils. The oils, again, as a liquid, so from the plant to the liquid will be done in Colombia, and then filling into a bottle. There's a small chemical process which is taking place in Australia as well. It's called decarboxylation. Decarboxylation, filling into the bottle and packaging, all of that will be taking place in Australia. That's how it goes. So fundamentally, you need to look at Colombia is fundamentally doing the ingredient supply, which in the case of flour, where the ingredient looks like a finished product, but for the other ones, it's really an ingredient which then gets manufactured into a finished product locally here in Australia.
Thank you. That was very thorough. In terms of the vapes, how do they differentiate between medical and recreational?
This is a pure regulatory, really distinction. So from a product perspective, the product and the formulation, I think, is the same. So, and I wouldn't draw a line there. And fundamentally, the way we look at the dividing line is we as a manufacturer need to comply first and foremost with what the regulation is. So that's always the starting point. And what a patient may want, I think, is a secondary underneath this, but the regulatory framework really defines for all of our products how they need to be adapted to the local market environments. And so therefore, when we send an oil to Brazil, let's say, it is an oil, but its formulation may be somewhat different. The way we need to package it will be different. So there will be variations around the product, but they're fundamentally defined by the regulatory scheme. And I don't know, Jesse, whether you on the vape piece, recreational versus medicinal, you had something else to add on that.
Well, from a medicinal standpoint, just purely talking about it, people still smoke cannabis as the main form of function of cannabis, right? So in all industry, in all markets, no matter the oldest ones and the newest ones, it's a history of people smoking, right? But I think a lot of that has to do with the bioavailability of the product. I think a lot of people, from a medicinal standpoint, that have, whether it be migraine, severe pain, they can't wait, 20, 30 minutes for something to go through their liver and through their blood system in that way. And so the bioavailability and the instant relief of a vape sometimes is purely medicinal as it is. Think of it as an inhaler in that type of manner. The difference is that, inhalers are medical devices that aren't available to medical cannabis companies currently. I would love to make that, an opportunity maybe in the future from research and development. But I think that with that, a lot of times, how people use products sometimes can be recreational, but they're medicinal products and vice versa. So for us, I think it's just a matter of standardization on that product and how we manufacture the product. A recreational market might have more flavors, PGVG type of vapor clouds, this more vape culture, whereas I don't see that being established or available by way of TGA.
Thank you so much. So currently there's a little bit of rhetoric in the media around claims that some cannabis suppliers are paying Aussie doctors to prescribe their products to patients. Can you speak to the current challenges for vertically integrated cannabis clinics in Australia?
Look, it's a piece of the industry which we are involved in as suppliers too. So I don't have a particular insight on it. I, of course, was exposed to this television coverage, which I think came out 24 or 48 hours ago. It's clearly a concern from a regulatory perspective. If there are practices which would be directly motivating doctors to prescribe cannabis and get paid for it, so. But I don't have like further insights or any commentary kind of beyond what has been said there until now. I don't know whether Jesse, you had something to say on the topic.
I mean, I know I've seen it before in that type of manner. I think it's a matter of regulation, tougher regulation. I think there's enough regulation on the product in and of itself, bringing it in and those types of things. I think the TGA does a good job on administering the fines with the brands and the companies. I think maybe potentially doctors need to be held accountable as well for that, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that take an oath for people's health, and it shouldn't be a matter of what kickbacks they're getting. But we live in an interesting world. I think that those things solve themselves. The better players hang out, and then the products that are working, the patients and the people that are consuming them, they're going to ask for those regardless of maybe what the doctor is pushing. But unfortunate if that's the case, but I think it'll solve itself over time.
Thank you. So currently, can you give a little bit of an idea of the tracking software you're using for tracking and processing your products?
No, I can't. But not because of I wouldn't know. Not that I would find it particularly confidentially or interesting, but that actually must say beats me. Don't know what software system we're using.
Fair
Torres.
Yeah, and it's actually by Torres. You're right. Yeah.
So speaking to your board, I know that you've had a new addition to your directorship. So Ash Ramachandran is on your board now. Can you give a little bit of flavour as to why he's a new addition to the team?
Yeah, Jesse and I were very excited about having been able to bring Ash to the board. Ash is a very special character and very accomplished life science and healthcare entrepreneur, at the same time an investor. He has raised over $200 million for life science and healthcare companies around the globe. He has a personal investment portfolio of about 50 companies, of which I think 7 have reached unicorn valuations, so valuation in excess of $1 billion. So we have been very privileged to have the conversations with Ash for probably about 3 to 4 months now. He has been excited by what he saw of what we're doing, both in Australia as well as worldwide. I think it was attractive for him personally. We have been had discussions with him, both Jesse and I. And fundamentally, if you think about the duo which you have in front of you right now on this call, Jesse is a brand person. I'm an operations guy. I think you're bringing someone in who has financial acumen, links into the medical and healthcare investor community. I think it's for the future of the company is, I think, very important, and I think validates to some extent that what we're doing is at least appealing to people who understand the investor community, have put money themselves into companies like this. And so I think we're very pleased to have him join the board. He, by the way, he is very familiar with the governance structure of crowd-funded companies. So, which is, I think, for the guys on this call who will be investors hopefully soon, I think should be coming as a great piece of comfort. So we have someone joining the team who understands very well of how post-investment governance works in a crowdfunding setting. So we're very pleased about this. I don't know, Jesse, whether you wanted to add something to that.
No, I think that's spot on. I think a lot of times people put people they like on boards and people that maybe don't fit yes people, and I don't feel Ash is that way. I think he's rounds us out, as Oliver said. Oliver's been in operations for years and has the type A personality. I'm, as someone said earlier today, still looking at what's going on in 2025 and 2026. And Ash will, I think, round that out, and we'll build that out also, as we expand. But always want complementary pieces, and I think he's very complementary.
Fantastic. Had another great question come through. Is there an industry or trade association for cannabis companies in Australia that lobby together with other players, the government, the TGA, for favourable policy making?
I don't know. I think we need to look into that. If there isn't one, I'd be happy to help with that. From my perspective, having been in the industry for as long as I have, when we started our story, I spoke and my brother spoke in front of governments on a regular basis to help steer the guidelines of whatever program they might implement, whether that be full medical marijuana, CBD only, THC, recreational, whatever that might be. I think having that can be very valuable as long as everybody is like-minded for what the purpose is. The purpose should be brand agnostic. It is to expand and to offer insight and help the TGA, because it's not an easy job. From our perspective, I would love to be able to be in those rooms, whether that be science, industry-based knowledge, whatever that might be. So if it's by trade group, it is something that we should look at. I know that there are a lot of industry groups as far as health goes, and conferences and those types of things. But as far as a direct ear to the TGA, I think it's something we should look at. I know one of our guys, Adam, who's really got his sort of heartbeat there, probably could help us in that and even pull people together. So if there isn't one, great question, and there should be one.
Thank you. So I'm sure it'll come as no surprise to people who follow Birchal and the companies that come onto the platform that there is another medicinal cannabis company on the platform in a different stage at the moment. Could you give a little bit of light as to the different differentiators between Stanley Brothers Australia and the other company that is on the platform?
Well, I would guess that people are referring to cannabonics at this point. So, look, I'm not intricately familiar at all with it, but the difference is cannabonics are cultivators, an Australian cultivator. I think we have already explained during this webinar kind of what our position is with regards to Australian cultivation. I think Rod, with whom I have had several conversations in the past, is a great guy. I think it's a very motivating entrepreneur with a good background. He comes from the real estate industry originally and is doing something positive, in Collie, in Western Australia, using, from what I understand, is renewable energy sources. I think that's a very laudable undertaking. It's a very different play. I think, in my mind, we are a sales and marketing company. We are deliberately not in the way we're structured as Stanley Brothers Australia, but deliberately not a cultivator. We're not a manufacturer. And so therefore, I think it's two really different propositions. And I think from an investor, you need to make up your mind of which part of the industry you'd like to be related to. The one is more capital intensive than the other, but these things can be weighted up, pros and cons. And I wish him a lot of luck. And I think they have been doing great things for the community there, and for the employment in the region. And I think that's a very important contribution, which I think we can only encourage, and we're very glad that he's doing that.
Yeah, I think that was a perfect answer, Oliver. Very different companies at very different stages. So that was really, really great. Thank you. So going forward, if people are to invest in Stanley Brothers Australia, how will you communicate with them post-raise?
So I think there's like a technical answer to this, that we have like a share registry contract that I think with a company called Cake. Again, it's not my area of expertise really, but in fundamentally there's like a baseline communication going out to the crowdfunding investors, which is that they get shared an annual report. There is, I think, on top of that, the possibility for certain investors to participate in an annual webinar, which will explain the annual report and allow like a forum like this to occur. And then as would be natural, is with some of the larger investors who are also, some of them bringing strategic things to the table. So there are people from the industry who are, I think, considering investing in us. With those people, we'll have an ongoing dialogue to be seen how that shapes out. Could be in the form of an advisory board. That all remains to be determined. But we, I think, pride ourselves that we want and to be very proactive with regards to fostering the community and the relationships with our investor base. That's why we chose crowdfunding in the first place for the Australian setup, really. So it's a close to our heart, and I think to our mission to establish this in a way where people are not just sending us a check and then they're here again in 365 days and get a 2-pager. I think that's not the intention, and we will be living up to that.
Perfect. Thank you. I think this is a really good place to finish up today. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time, and thank you everyone for your incredible questions. The participation was huge today, so really, really appreciate it. If anybody does want any further information on investing, please head to the Birchal website and you can get in touch with Oliver and Jesse through there as well. If you've got any questions about investing through the platform, you can also reach out to the Birchal team through the Birchal website. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Oliver and Jesse, for everything.
Thanks to you. Thanks for listening.